Woodstock promoter told Jimi Hendrix he'd play, last after everyone left. Jimi's response left, 180,000 people frozen. It was August 18, 1969. The Woodstock Music Festival was supposed to end on Sunday night. It didn't. Rain, mud, technical failures, and the sheer unmanageable scale of 500,000 people in a field in upstate New York had pushed every act back by hours, then by an entire day. By the time the production team sat down to figure out who was closing the festival, it was already Monday morning and most of the crowd had gone home. Most. Not all. The man who delivered the news to Jimi Hendrix was a production coordinator named Roy, a 28-year-old from New Jersey who had been awake for 36 hours and who had drawn the short straw among the production staff for the job of walking to Jimi's trailer and explaining the situation. The situation was this. The festival had run so far over schedule that Jimi's headlining slot, which had been planned for Sunday night in front of the full crowd, was now going to happen Monday morning at 8 a.m. in front of whatever remained of the audience. Roy knocked on the trailer door. Jimi opened it. Roy explained the situation in the careful tone of someone delivering news they know is not going to be well received. He said, "We're looking at maybe 40,000 people still out there. Most of the crowd has left. It's going to be 8 in the morning by the time you go on." He paused and then said the part he had been dreading. "You're not going to be playing to the festival anymore. You're going to be playing to whoever's left." Jimi looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Are there people out there?" Roy said, "Yes, but..." Jimi said, "Then there's an audience. Tell the band we're going on." Roy stood in the doorway for a moment, not entirely sure he had heard correctly. He had prepared, on the walk over, for several possible responses: anger, negotiation, a demand to speak with someone higher up the production hierarchy. He had not prepared for that specific answer, delivered in that specific tone, which was not the tone of someone making the best of a bad situation, but the tone of someone who had genuinely not registered the situation as bad. He walked back to the production tent and told the team, "He's going on." To understand why Jimi's answer was not what Roy expected, you have to understand what the Woodstock scheduling situation actually meant in industry terms. Jimi Hendrix was the highest paid performer at Woodstock. He had been promised the closing headline slot, the most prestigious position in the lineup, the moment when the entire assembled crowd, the largest in music festival history, would be watching. The slot he was now being offered instead was, by any conventional measure, an insult. 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. A depleted crowd. The cameras mostly packed up. The moment that was supposed to define his live career reduced to a footnote. Every business and legal instinct available to a performer in that situation pointed in the same direction. Refuse. Demand the original slot be honored in some form. Walk away. File a grievance. The contract had promised him something specific, and what he was being offered was not that thing. Jimi had heard all of these arguments, in various forms, from the people around him in the hours before Roy knocked on the door. His manager had made them clearly and forcefully. His bandmates had made them with varying degrees of urgency. The consensus among everyone in his orbit was that what was being offered was unacceptable, and that accepting it would set a damaging precedent. Jimi listened to all of it. Then he asked the question he had asked Roy, "Are there people out there?" The answer was yes. Estimates vary. Some accounts say 30,000, some say 40, some say as many as 80,000 people were still on the Woodstock grounds when Jimi took the stage at approximately 8 in the morning on August 18, 1969. Whatever the exact number, it was a number that represented human beings who had stayed, who had slept in the mud and the rain and the chaos of the previous 3 days and had not left, who were still there in the early morning light, waiting. Jimi understood something about that number that the production coordinator and the managers and the business advisors did not. The people who stay are not the same as the people who come. The people who come to a festival come for many reasons: for the experience, for the social occasion, for the specific acts on the lineup, for the story of having been there. The people who stay, after the mud and the rain and the sleepless nights, after the crowd has thinned and the amenities have collapsed and the rational calculation says it's time to go, those people stay for one reason. They stay because the music matters more than the comfort of leaving. He had been playing to audiences his entire career. He knew the difference between an audience that was present and an audience that was there. The 30 or 40 or 80,000 people on that field at 8 in the morning were not there in the passive sense. They were present in the specific chosen sense of having decided, through 3 days of difficulty, that this was worth staying for. He was not going to tell them they had made the wrong decision by walking away. The Jimi Hendrix Experience took the stage at Woodstock at approximately 8 a.m. on Monday, August 18, 1969, in the thin, early morning light of an upstate New York summer, with the grounds around them showing the evidence of everything the previous 3 days had been: the mud, the abandoned belongings, the structures that had not survived the weather, the scale of what had been there, visible in its absence, the field shaped by the impression of 500,000 people who had mostly gone home, and the people who were still there. Jimmy walked to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Then he said something that nobody in the production tent had scripted and nobody in the audience had expected. He said, "We'd like to get something straight. We got tired of the experience, and every once in a while we were blowing the minds of each other. So we decided to change the whole thing around and call it Gypsy Sun and Rainbows." Then he played for 2 hours. What happened in those 2 hours has been described, in the accounts of everyone who was present, in terms that struggle against the limitations of language for capturing what music does to a crowd when everything is exactly right. The set Jimmy played that morning was not a truncated version of what he had planned for the Sunday headline slot. It was something else, looser, more exploratory, shaped by the specific quality of the morning and the specific quality of the audience and the specific freedom that comes from performing for people who have already proven they are there for the music and nothing else. He played Purple Haze. He played Voodoo Child. He played Red House with a slowness and a depth that the song had never quite had in the louder, fuller performances of the festival's prime slots. And then, toward the end of the set, he played something that people who were on that field that morning still talk about when anyone asks them what Woodstock actually was. He played the Star-Spangled Banner, not the version that is played at sporting events and civic ceremonies, with its careful fidelity to the written notes and its implicit promise to render the familiar thing in the familiar way. The version Jimmy played at Woodstock on the morning of August 18, 1969, took the national anthem and passed it through everything that had happened in America in the decade that had produced Woodstock. The war, the assassinations, the cities burning, the generation that had come to a field in upstate New York because the culture they had been handed did not fit what they were living. He played the anthem as a question, as a wound, as a sound that asked what the song was actually about when you held it up against the reality it was supposed to represent. The crowd, which had been loud and responsive through the full 2 hours, went completely silent. Not the silence of inattention or boredom. The silence of people who have been reached somewhere they did not know they could be reached from a stage. The specific silence that Janis Joplin had described when she talked about what music was supposed to do. The sound of an audience giving something up. Some held thing releasing. Roy, the production coordinator who had knocked on the trailer door that morning and delivered the news that most of the crowd had gone home, was standing at the side of the stage watching. He had been awake for 40 hours by this point, and he was not, by his own account, in a condition to be moved by anything. He said later that he stood at the side of the stage during the Star-Spangled Banner and cried without entirely understanding why. He said, "I had told him the crowd was gone. I was wrong. The crowd that was there was more crowd than I knew how to measure." The band that took the stage with Jimmy that morning was not the original Jimi Hendrix Experience. Noel Redding had left the group earlier that summer, and what Jimmy brought to Woodstock was the new configuration he had been building. Mitch Mitchell on drums, Billy Cox on bass, Larry Lee on rhythm guitar, and 2 percussionists, Juma Sultan and Jerry Velez. He had introduced them the night before, in the trailer, as Gypsy Sun and Rainbows, which was not an official band name so much as a description of what the music was trying to become, something looser and more expansive than the tight power trio format of the experience. "We know be what it's you folks, than she were so to Shuales." Daridro called. It for the directions he had been wanting to explore. The production team had not been informed of the name change. When Jimmy announced it from the stage, there was a brief moment of confusion in the production tent, people looking at each other wondering if this was a problem that needed to be solved. It was not a problem. It was a statement of intent, that what was about to happen was not a reduced version of what had been planned, but a different thing entirely, shaped by the morning and the audience and the particular freedom of performing for people who had already given everything they had just to be present. Billy Cox, who had known Jimmy since their Army days and who had rejoined him specifically for this new configuration, said afterward that the Woodstock set felt different from any performance he had been part of before, not because of the crowd size or the historic significance of the event, because of the quality of attention coming from the field. He said, when you play for people who chose to be there the way those people chose to be there, through everything they had been through, you can feel the choosing in how they listen. It changes what you play. It makes you reach further because you know they'll follow wherever you go. Jimmy reached further at Woodstock than he had reached in months. The set ran over 2 hours, which was longer than any slot on the festival program had been designed to accommodate, and nobody stopped it. Nobody in the production tent looked at the clock and made the call to wrap it up. The people responsible for those decisions were standing at the side of the stage or in the field itself, watching, and the thought of interrupting it did not arrive. The footage that exists from that morning, partial, imperfect, captured by cameras that had been in the field for 3 days and whose operators were operating on no sleep, shows the crowd in a state that is difficult to categorize using the vocabulary available for concert audiences. Not the ecstatic movement of a crowd responding to high-energy performance, not the respectful stillness of a classical concert audience. Something in between, something that moved and was still simultaneously the specific physical state of people who are being reached at a level below conscious response and whose bodies are doing what they do when something arrives that the mind has not yet processed. There is a specific moment in the existing Woodstock footage, approximately 40 minutes into the set, where the camera pulls back from a close-up of Jimmy playing to a wide shot of the field. The contrast between the two frames is the visual equivalent of what the morning actually was. The close-up shows a musician in total absorption, eyes closed, playing something that is clearly reaching past the song's written structure into whatever is available in the moment. The wide shot shows the field, vast, muddy, dotted with the remaining tens of thousands, and completely still. Not the stillness of a crowd waiting. The stillness of a crowd that has arrived somewhere. The cameraman who made that pullback said in a later interview that he had not planned it. He said the close-up had been the intended shot and the wide shot had happened because something made him want to see the whole thing at once. He said, I needed to see how many people were receiving what I was watching him give. And when I pulled back and saw the field, I understood that the number didn't matter. The field was full of something that had nothing to do with how many people were standing in it. Roy, the production coordinator, kept the wristband from that Monday for the rest of his life, not a souvenir of the full weekend. Specifically the Monday. He said, I've told that story hundreds of times. The part people want to know is what Jimmy's face looked like when I said most of the crowd was gone. And the answer is that his face didn't do anything. Because the information I thought I was delivering wasn't the information he received. I thought I was telling him the crowd was gone. He heard that there were still people there. Same words, completely different message. The production coordinator who had walked to the trailer that morning to deliver what he believed was bad news had given Jimi Hendrix the most important piece of information of the entire festival. Not the information he intended to give, not the depleted numbers and the difficult timing and the implicit suggestion that what was being offered was a diminished version of what had been promised. The information underneath that, the information that mattered, there are people out there. There are people out there was enough. It had always been enough. It was, for Jimi Hendrix, the only number that mattered, not the size of the crowd, but the fact of it. Not how many had stayed, but that any had stayed. That the music had been worth 3 days of mud and rain and discomfort to someone, to tens of thousands of someones who had made a choice that required no further justification. He walked off stage at approximately 10 in the morning. The festival was over. The field was emptying of its last remaining occupants, moving slowly toward the exits with the particular quality of people who are not ready to leave but understand that the thing they stayed for has now been completed. Roy was waiting at the side of the stage. He said, I'm sorry about the timing. Jimmy looked at him. He said, don't be. Those were the right people. He picked up the guitar case and walked toward the trailer. Behind him, the field that had held 500,000 people 3 days earlier held only the evidence of what it had been, and the memory in the minds of the tens of thousands who had stayed of what it had become at 8 in the morning on a Monday when the highest-paid performer at the largest music festival in history had been told the crowd was gone and had asked only one question in response. Are there people out there?